Just have a quick review of where we're up to. A little recap around motivation, team building stages, leadership styles, before we start looking at the roles people play in teams, which is another impact. Last activity, you looked at your teams or your team on the Tuckerman sort of cogs ladder stages, and we can see from that, depending on what stage they're at, it'll bring different implications to the team and individual and the sort of style we use. For example, we may need to be more directive or telling in the forming stages, and then we might have to start leaving them alone a little bit and start selling for them to form. And then in the storming stages, we might have to be more participative. We might have to be selling and testing things. And then as they come into the norming stages, we might have to be testing things, consulting with them. And then once they reach the performing, we can start to delegate and abdicate. And those things I'm talking about are from the leadership continuum that we talked about. But that continuum that Tanner Baumer-Schmidt we talked about was about allowing the flexibility to move up and down. And we'll have to do that for certain individuals or for certain members of the team as we go through different stages, because the team is made up of all sorts of different people, and we have to be able to balance the needs of the team with the needs of the individual, and we have to be able to make sure they can interact and liaise with each other and work with each other. The team dynamics is a key factor in determining how successful that team will be and whether they'll ever achieve their goals. People behave differently, and they behave differently in teams, and we're going to have to be helpful and supportive to allow others to take different times to get involved in that team and for the work to still get done. And we may get, and it can cause some friction, some disharmony or some discord in the team as they start to realise where they sit. You have probably worked in some effective teams, and you've worked in some that aren't so effective. And I don't think there's any magic potion of a way of making people get on so that the team can move forward, or about working out what's limiting their progress. But we're going to look at some tools and some models and some bits and pieces that we can help to try and make that process smoother. You've got to be aware of your approach, how you go about managing people, how you go about motivating them, and it can be based on your past experiences. If you go in with an assumption that they don't want to do a good job, that they're lazy, that they just want an easy life, so you've got a pessimistic view, then you're more likely to, no matter how hard you try, be tempted to think about prompting them with rewards and punishments, about completing their tasks and micromanaging them to get those tasks complete. Whereas if your impression is that they seem good, that I'm sure they will appreciate it, and they want to have a chance to prove themselves, that they are going to be hardworking, then you're going to move towards a collaborative, trust-based relationship. You're going to give them greater responsibility. You're going to encourage them to go out and find ways to improve, suggest a way forward, develop skills. You can use open and encouraging communication rather than trying to control them, and that can be hard if you've had a bad experience. But it's about being positive, and that comes and is based on the X and Y theory by McGregor. The X being quite a constraining, repetitive sort of management process, all based on carrot and stick. Everything based around remuneration, and it's about keeping tabs on people, and people just being another cog in the wheel, and it can be quite repetitive and tiring for the staff and for the manager. Whereas the Y is about respecting that people have a desire and they want something meaningful to do, they want satisfaction, they want respect, they want to be feeling that they're of worth as well as their pay, etc. And they're both about the way you approach them. As we talked about in the motivation earlier, the motivation for each is different, and each can have a different impact on the team or the individual. Remember when we looked at Vroom's expectancy theory, one of the three factors was valiance. So is the individual's perspective, do they believe that their efforts will get them recognition? Do they believe, therefore, that they should put in the effort for the team? And from the team's perspective, do they understand or believe in the goal or the outcome that the team's trying to achieve? And do they believe that that'll be recognised by you as the leader? In the Maslow's hierarchy, it was really about individuals, and we looked at how that would get them engaged, and we need to build on that engagement to get them to that self-actualization so that they really feel they can take part and take control. And then in Hertzberg's dual factor theory, there was the hygiene and the motivation. The hygiene really relates to the individual. It's that people management side. Have we met those needs? Because if they don't meet those hygiene needs, then they're not going to be motivated to work as part of the team. And the motivation bit, the challenge, the interesting work, the responsibility, is about the team, and we'll be supporting them and making sure that's true. Finally, we looked at Adams' equity theory, input versus output, or equal to output. And like you say, from the individual side, the input, do they believe that their efforts will be rewarded by an output? Respect from the team and the leader. Do they believe they'll be appreciated by the team members? That'll be the output they expect to get if they're prepared to put in the input. So how you approach it, the motivation, and the way we go about it. So let's start having a look at that we recognize individuals have different traits and different characteristics, and teams are made up of different roles, and we all need to play our part. There's many theories based around that. We're going to take a look at three. We're going to take a look at Bean and Sheets. We're going to take a look at Belbin, and we're going to take a look at Firo. So we'll do that over the next couple of slides. So just before we start to examine those theories, methodologies, I just want to sort of talk about why team roles are so important. There's a number of reasons. Firstly, we need to know as the leader, when we're developing the team, what roles we need and what we've got so that we can make the team the most effective. The team members need to know so they know what part they're expected to play and what their other team members are going to do to help that dynamics. And to do that, we need to know, and they need to know, which bits they're good at and which bits they're not good at. And part of that was some of the theory that Kenneth Bean and Paul Sheets came up with. They were two theorists about group behavior, and they wrote an article back in the 1940s about functional roles of group members, but it still holds true, the basics of it, 60 years later, plus years later, and it defined 26 roles that people can play, or they can play more than one part in a functioning team or group. And it's been refined many times in more recent research, but the ideas still remain the same. And it is an interesting way for us to look at group behavior and the roles. So we'll look at that theory in the next slide. Their theory defined all the categories, all the group roles into three categories. There was task roles, personal and social roles, and dysfunctional and individualistic roles. So task roles, they said, were about getting the work done. The different roles needed in the step-by-step project team development from the initial concept through all the actions to completion, and people may fill many of those different roles during the lifetime of a project or a team. The second they talked about were the personal and social roles, and those were the things that contributed to a positive functioning team. And then the final category was dysfunctional or individualistic roles, and these were ones that went about disrupting the group progress and weakening the group's cohesion. Let's have a look at those individually. So in the task category, it was the largest group of roles, and they were things such as the initiator, contributor. They said these were people who proposed original ideas or different ways of approaching goals or problems, and the role initiated discussion and moved the group forward and helped there to be exploration. The next ones they talked about was the information seekers and givers. The seekers seek facts, expert information. They like to clarify and identify what's missing so they can try and move things forward. And the givers are the people who provide the information to the group, and they're often seen as an authority on the subject and relate their own experiences where they feel it's relevant. Opinion seekers were seeking clarification of people's values, attitudes, the opinions of the group, and making sure that people's different perspectives were given and heard, whereas the givers were expressing their opinions and their beliefs about a subject, and doing this as if they were stating, this is what we should do, as if they had an authority in it. There's lots of others in this group, such as elaborators, coordinators, orienteers, evaluator, critics, energizers, recorders, and procedural technicians. And there's a full handout with a bit more detail on those, but you sort of get the picture. These were all things that were little steps that needed to be done to move things forward in that group. Next category was the personal and social, and that included things such as encouragers and harmonizers. Encouragers affirm and support and offer praise to the efforts of the fellow group members and demonstrate warmth and positive attitude towards everybody. And harmonizers were the people who were trying to resolve differences and seek ways to reduce tension and diffuse situations, quite often using humor. They then talked about compromisers and gatekeepers. Compromisers would do things for the good of the group and yield positions and meet people halfway, and the gatekeepers were ensuring that the flow of information kept coming and that they were making sure that everyone had a chance to express themselves and making sure that even the quiet and unassuming people got to have a chance, and that they limited people who tried to dominate it. And they may even suggest a set of standards for making sure that took place. And finally, observers and followers, or commentators, they would provide the feedback for the group and let everyone know how things go in. So they were observing things and commentating on it. And then the followers were the people who just accepted what others had decided and didn't even contribute, but they just sort of hangers on, as some people might determine them, and they're really seen as listeners and not contributors. The final category was the dysfunctional or individualistic, and most of these turned out to be sort of people that caused problems that a lot of us in the team didn't like. Aggressors were those sort of people who make personal attacks using belittling, insulting comments on people. They're trying to decrease other member status. And the blockers, what we used to call neggies, the negative people, they're opposed to everything but don't really put any suggestions forward. Then there were recognition seekers or help seekers, and then self-confessors. The recognition seekers were looking for personal attention, always bragging about past achievements, how they'd done things, how they felt they were the best, and sort of making excessive noise and quite often distracting from people actually getting on with the task. The help seekers were always sort of saying, I'm useless with this sort of stuff, I need help, oh, I'm not going to be much help. So they're always playing themselves down, looking for sympathy. And then the self-confessors are the people who are disclosing sometimes factors that didn't even have any resemblance to the issues, that were personal feelings, personal issues, stories about them and their past, that didn't really bear any resemblance. So we're just seeking attention. The final group at the bottom, the disruptors, dominators, and special interest pleaders. Disruptors were really out to just distract others, telling jokes, messing around, sometimes categorized as the playboy, playgirl ones. They're just pranking, but it was just a distraction, or it is just a distraction for them and to distract others from the task. The dominators try to take over. They want to dominate the conversation. They often exaggerate their knowledge and their expertise to try and make sure that they're the centre of attention. And the special interest pleaders were normally making suggestions about what others would feel, how others think about things, and often trying to keep away from what they felt and not talking about their own biased opinions, or start using stereotypical terms, saying, oh, this is what would happen, this is what would happen. So a useful but quite complicated group of roles to play within a team. They didn't actually prescribe any application for their theory. They just sort of put it out there as identifying the roles, and we can use it, and it has been used by a lot of other theories to develop things, but we can use it just as a way of thinking about what roles there are, identifying what people are doing and how they're reacting and what role that's taking in the team, so that we can either try and eliminate some of them or we can try and build someone to fill that role, or see what role is missing that needs to make the team effective. So that's the Ben and Sheets functional roles, and we'll take a look at a couple of others. Right then, so let's take a look at another one, FIRO. Fundamental Interpersonal Relations Orientation. Big title, but it's all about relationships, as that title sort of indicates. It's really a tool that's often used to repair or build relationships, so where a relationship is broken down, or to take a functional relationship to a higher level, and that's where we'd be talking about using it. We know relationships are key to unlocking potential in the workplace. It's that interaction between the team building, and the individuals and their roles within that team, which is all the stuff we've been talking about. It works on the principle that we all have wants and needs around three key factors, areas: inclusion, control, and affection. Affection, sometimes called connection. It can be used to help individuals recognize their own wants so that they can change their behaviors, adapt, so they can influence others and build stronger relationships with their colleagues. And it can be an excellent resource when we doing some of the coaching we talked about before, when we can start to recognize ourselves and help the coachee recognize their underlying motivations towards the reactions and what they want from their team's relationship. We know the relationships are absolutely key for team building. They're part of everyday life, and if they're not good, no matter how much work you do, if the relationships aren't right in the team, the dynamics, then they're going to cause tension and conflict, or they're going to lead to poor performance, lack of delivery, or efficiency issues. So we need to understand them. If a team's going to reach the top performance, as we talked about on Cog's ladder, that esprit or Tuckerman's performing level, then we need to have a solid relationship within the team, and there needs to be a trust element there so they understand each other. FIRO-B can be used. The FIRO-B is a test that you can do, which can be used to identify those drivers and help people shape those relationships. There's more in a video that talks about FIRO-B as a test, but it's about relationships and building those relationships and recognizing the wants in those areas. And then the final one we're going to look at in this area is probably one you may have heard of, Belbin, famous theory on team roles. I'm not going to say too much because there's a video afterwards that explains it nicely, but it identified 9 team roles. Can be used to identify people's behavioural strengths and weaknesses in the workplace. Not weaknesses as in general weaknesses, but weaknesses in those roles, so therefore identifying by default their best or strongest areas. Probably one of the best things it does is gives us a common language to talk about when talking about team roles, their individual suitabilities and the team functions, and it clarifies things quite a bit simpler than the other method we looked at, which had 26 sort of roles in 3 categories. This gives us a greater understanding, and there is methods and ways within the theory to use this moving forward. So Belbin has some tests you can do to identify things, activities you can do as groups, and be quite an understanding and an eye-opener for a team to understand each other as they move forward. So we're going to use that in an activity in a minute, so let's have a look at the activity. For this activity, activity 3, I want you to watch the videos which explain more on FIRO-B and Belbin's team roles that we've talked about, and also take a look at the resources. There is some stuff in there about the psychometric areas, teams, the way we manage them, and Ben and Sheets. Once you've done that, there's an activity sheet. For part 2, I want you to assess your team against the information you know on team roles. Now, if you can, and if you've got the opportunity, it'd be great if you could do some of the assessments with them, look at their areas. You may have already done them, they may be there. Otherwise, it's just a case of you evaluating them yourself and trying to work out where you feel people fit in each team role. Because really, we're just talking here about showing your knowledge of understanding of those team roles. So complete that, and then once you've uploaded that, we can come back to the next section.